The candles in the grand hall burned bright, but the air had turned cold the moment the Duke raised his voice. Elena Whitmore stood near the marble pillars, a glass of untouched wine in her hand, watching as Duke Alaric Vane gripped the wrist of a young servant boy who had spilled a drop of wine on his sleeve. The boy trembled, his tray shaking, his eyes wide with fear. The room had gone quiet, the kind of quiet that presses on the ears. "Do you know what this coat cost?" Alaric said, his voice low and sharp enough to cut through the silence. "More than your family will earn in a lifetime." The boy could not speak. His lips moved, but no words came out. Elena felt something twist inside her chest. She had seen cruelty before, in shops and markets, in men who thought money gave them the right to crush anyone smaller than themselves. But she had never seen it dressed in silk and delivered with such calm, practiced coldness. She set her glass down on a nearby table and walked forward before she could stop herself. "My lord," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the hall. "Perhaps the coach should be more concerned about the wine than the boy. After all, the boy did not choose to be born poor. You, however, chose to be cruel." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Somewhere near the string quartet, a fan snapped shut. Alaric turned his head slowly, as if he could not quite believe what he had heard. His eyes found her. They were gray, the color of storm clouds before the rain begins, and they studied her with a mixture of disbelief and something colder, something that promised she would regret her words. "And who," he said, releasing the boy's wrist without looking at him, "gave you permission to speak to me?" "No one," Elena said, lifting her chin. "I simply have a habit of speaking when I see something wrong. It seems to be a rare habit in this room." Laughter, quiet but unmistakable, rose from a cluster of young women near the windows. One of them, a curious blonde girl in blue, pressed her hand to her mouth to hide a smile. Alaric's jaw tightened. "You are the merchant's daughter," he said, as if identifying a stain on his glove. "Whitmore, is it? I have heard your father made his fortune selling silk to people who cannot tell true quality from cheap imitation." "My father made his fortune through honest work," Elena replied evenly. "Something I imagine is unfamiliar in a house built on inherited titles rather than earned respect." The room seemed to hold its breath. Elena's friend, Margaret, who had been standing near the refreshment table, hurried forward and took her arm. "Elena," Margaret whispered urgently, "that is enough, please." But Elena did not step back. She held the Duke's gaze, refusing to be the first to look away. Something about him unsettled her. Not fear exactly, but an awareness that she had struck a nerve buried deep beneath layers of pride and control. Alaric's expression did not change, but his voice dropped lower, quieter, more dangerous than before. "You have made a mistake tonight, Miss Whitmore," he said. "One I do not think you will forget." "Neither will you," Elena said. "Considering how many people just watched you humiliate a child over a single drop of wine." For a moment, something flickered across his face, something that might have been anger, or perhaps, buried far beneath it, something closer to shame, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the same icy composure he wore like armor. He turned without another word, and walked toward the terrace doors, his shoulders stiff, his steps measured and controlled. The crowd parted for him instinctively, the way water parts for a blade. Margaret pulled Elena toward a quieter corner of the hall, her fingers digging into Elena's arm. "Do you have any idea who that was?" Margaret hissed. "That is Duke Alaric Vane. He owns half the land between here and the northern coast. He does not forget insults, Elena. Men like him do not forgive them either." "Then he can add mine to whatever list he keeps," Elena said, though her heart was beating faster than she wanted to admit. Someone needed to say it. "It did not have to be you," Margaret said. "No one else was going to." Margaret sighed, glancing nervously toward the terrace doors where the Duke had disappeared. "My father does business with his estate. If he decides to make trouble for your family because of tonight, he would not dare harm an entire family over a few words at a ball," Elena said, though even as she spoke, doubt crept into her voice. The music resumed, though it felt hollow now, as if the entire room understood something significant had shifted. Elena excused herself and stepped toward the open doors leading to the garden, needing air, needing distance from the weight of dozens of curious eyes now following her every movement. Outside, the night was cool. The stars scattered like scattered silver dust across the dark sky. She walked along the stone path bordering the rose bushes, her heart still pounding from the confrontation. She had not planned to speak. She rarely planned such things, but there was something about watching a grown man twice the boy's size grip a trembling wrist with such casual cruelty that made her blood boil past the point of silence. Her mother had always told her that silence in the face of cruelty was its own kind of cruelty. Elena had carried those words with her since she was a child, and tonight they had spoken louder than her fear of consequence. She reached the low stone wall at the edge of the garden and rested her hands against the cool stone, looking out over the dark hills beyond the estate. "You should be more careful with your tongue." The voice startled her. She turned to find Alaric standing several feet away, half hidden by the shadow of a tall hedge, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable in the dim light spilling from the windows behind them. "I did not realize you followed young women into gardens after they insult you," Elena said, keeping her voice steady despite the sudden rush of her pulse. "I did not follow you," he said. "I came out here before you did. You simply chose the same path. Then I shall choose another." "Wait!" She paused, half turned away, surprised by the command in his voice, though it held none of the coldness from the ballroom. It sounded almost like restraint, as if he were holding something back. "What you said in there," he continued, his eyes fixed somewhere past her shoulder, avoiding her gaze entirely, "was inappropriate. It was true." "Truth and appropriateness are not always the same thing, Miss Whitmore." "No," she agreed, "but cruelty and power are not always justice either, my lord. Perhaps you should consider that before you humiliate another servant in front of an entire room." His eyes finally met hers, and for a brief moment, something passed between them, something neither of them could name, something that felt dangerously close to understanding. Then his expression hardened again, the walls rebuilding themselves as quickly as they had briefly lowered. "You know nothing about my life, or the reasons behind my actions," he said quietly. "Do not presume to lecture me on matters you cannot possibly understand." "Then perhaps you should explain them," Elena said, instead of hiding behind a title and a scowl. His jaw tightened. "Good night, Miss Whitmore." He turned and walked back toward the house, his figure swallowed quickly by the darkness beyond the garden lanterns. Elena stood alone for a long moment, her heart still racing, unsure whether the sensation in her chest was anger, confusion, or something else entirely, that she was not yet ready to name. She returned to the ballroom only long enough to find her father, a broad-shouldered man with kind eyes and graying hair, who was deep in conversation with two other merchants near the refreshment tables. "There you are," her father said, smiling warmly as she approached. "Enjoying the evening?" "It has been eventful," Elena said carefully, deciding it was best not to mention the confrontation just yet. Her father studied her for a moment, his smile faltering slightly. "Eventful how?" Before she could answer, one of the merchants beside her father cleared his throat. "Actually, Master Whitmore, I believe your daughter had quite the exchange with the Duke of Vane this evening." Her father's eyebrows rose. "The Duke?" "She defended a servant boy," the merchant continued, his tone somewhere between admiration and concern. "Told the Duke rather plainly that his cruelty was unbecoming of his station." Her father turned to her slowly, his expression difficult to read. "Elena." "He was hurting that boy over nothing," Elena said quickly. "I could not simply stand there and watch." Her father was quiet for a long moment, and Elena braced herself for disappointment, for a lecture about propriety and caution. Instead, he simply sighed and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You have your mother's heart," he said softly, "and her habit of speaking truth to power without thinking of the consequences." "Is that a compliment or a warning?" Elena asked. "Both," her father said, though there was a flicker of worry behind his eyes. "The Duke of Vane is not a man known for forgiveness, Elena. I have heard stories. He is proud, controlled, and unyielding. I only hope tonight does not cause trouble for our family in the future." "I do not regret what I said," Elena replied firmly. "I did not ask you to regret it," her father said. "I only ask you to be prepared for what may come of it." Elena nodded, though a part of her could not shake the memory of the Duke's eyes in the garden, the brief flicker of something human beneath all that cold control, something that had surprised her more than she wanted to admit. The carriage ride home was quiet, the city lights passing by the window in slow, golden streaks. Elena watched them without truly seeing them, her mind replaying the events of the evening again and again. The boy's trembling hands, the Duke's cold voice, the sudden silence of the room. And then, later, the garden, the shadows, the strange unspoken tension that had passed between them, like a current neither of them controlled. She told herself it meant nothing. He was a proud, arrogant man who believed his title placed him above ordinary human kindness. She had spoken the truth, and truth often came with consequences. If the Duke chose to hold a grudge over a few honest words, that was a reflection of his character, not hers. And yet, despite her resolve, she could not stop wondering what reasons might lie behind a man so guarded, so controlled, so quick to anger, yet slow to explain himself. There had been something in his eyes in the garden, something that did not match the cruelty she had witnessed in the ballroom. She pushed the thought aside as the carriage rolled to a stop outside her family's townhouse. Whatever lay beneath the Duke's cold exterior was not her concern. She had spoken her mind, and now it was finished. But as she stepped down from the carriage and looked up at the star-scattered sky, she could not shake the feeling that the events of tonight were only the beginning of something far larger, something neither of them could yet see coming. 2 days later, a letter arrived at the Whitmore household bearing an unfamiliar wax seal, a crest depicting a hawk with its wings spread wide against a rising sun. Elena's father broke the seal with careful hands, while Elena watched from across the study, her stomach tightening with unease. He read the letter in silence, his expression shifting from confusion to something closer to concern. "What is it?" Elena asked, unable to bear the silence any longer. Her father looked up slowly. "It is from the estate of Duke Vane," he said. "It appears he wishes to discuss a business matter with our family. He has requested a meeting at the estate within the week." Elena felt her heart drop. A business matter? What sort of business matter would the Duke have with us? Her father set the letter down on his desk, rubbing his temple with 2 fingers. "I am not entirely certain," he admitted. "But given the timing, I suspect it has something to do with your encounter at the ball." Elena swallowed hard, memories of cold gray eyes, and quiet, dangerous words rising unbidden in her mind. Whatever the Duke intended, she had a feeling it was not simply business. And somewhere deep within her, beneath the unease and the wariness, a small, unwelcome flicker of curiosity stirred, wondering what exactly awaited her behind the gates of the Vane estate. The Vane estate rose from the countryside like something out of an old painting, its gray stone walls covered in ivy, its windows tall and narrow, catching the morning light in sharp golden lines. Elena sat stiffly in the carriage beside her father, her gloved hands folded tightly in her lap, watching the estate grow larger as they approached the long gravel drive. "You do not have to come inside if you would rather wait here," her father said gently, noticing the tension in her posture. "I am not afraid of him," Elena said, though the words came out firmer than she felt. Her father studied her for a moment, then nodded, deciding not to press further. The carriage rolled to a stop before the wide stone steps leading to the entrance, where a tall butler with silver hair waited to receive them. Inside, the estate was grand, in a quiet, restrained way, nothing like the loud opulence Elena had expected. The walls were lined with paintings of stern-faced ancestors, the furniture dark and polished, the air carrying a faint scent of old wood and beeswax. They were led through a long corridor into a study, where Duke Alaric Vane stood waiting near a tall window, his hands clasped behind his back, exactly as they had been in the garden 2 nights before. He turned as they entered, his expression carefully neutral, though his eyes flickered briefly toward Elena before settling on her father. "Master Whitmore," he said, extending a hand. "Thank you for coming." "Your Grace," her father replied, shaking his hand with practiced formality. "You mentioned a business matter of some importance." "Please, sit," Alaric said, gesturing toward 2 chairs positioned before his desk. Elena and her father sat, and Alaric remained standing, moving slowly toward the window, before turning back to face them. "My estate has recently secured a contract to supply fine textiles to several noble households across the region," he began. "I understand your family's business has an excellent reputation for silk and fine fabric. I am prepared to offer a partnership between our estate and your trading company, provided the arrangement proves satisfactory to both parties. Elena's father leaned forward slightly, clearly intrigued despite his earlier wariness. That is a generous offer, Your Grace. May I ask what prompted your interest in our company specifically? Your reputation precedes you, Alaric said simply, and your daughter's outspoken nature at the ball convinced me that your family does not simply tell people what they wish to hear. I find that quality useful in business partners, even if I find it less comfortable in social settings. Elena stiffened at the subtle jab, though she said nothing, unwilling to give him the satisfaction of a reaction in front of her father. There is, however, one condition, Alaric continued. Given the scale of this arrangement, I require someone from your household to oversee the details directly here at the estate for the coming weeks, ensuring the transition runs smoothly. Since your daughter appears to have strong opinions on matters of quality and fairness, perhaps she would be suited to the task. Elena's eyes snapped up to meet his. You wish for me to work here? At your estate? For a few weeks, yes, Alaric said, his tone maddeningly calm. Unless you believe your opinions only apply when convenient, and not when actual responsibility is required. Her father glanced between them, clearly sensing the tension, but unsure of its source. Elena has always had a keen eye for quality and fair dealing. I do not see why she could not assist with this arrangement, provided the terms are respectable, and her presence here is properly chaperoned. Of course, Alaric said smoothly. My aunt, Lady Beatrice, resides here permanently, and would ensure everything remains entirely proper. Elena wanted to object, wanted to say that she had no interest in spending weeks under the same roof as a man who had all but promised to make her regret her words at the ball. But she could see the opportunity gleaming in her father's eyes, the potential for a partnership that could secure their family's business for years to come, and she knew refusing now would cost him something he had worked his entire life to build. I accept, she said finally, her voice steady, despite the unease twisting in her stomach. Alaric's eyes held hers for a long moment. Something unreadable flickered across his face before he nodded once, satisfied. Excellent, he said. You may begin tomorrow. The arrangements were settled quickly after that, details of contracts and shipments discussed between her father and Alaric, while Elena sat quietly, her mind racing with questions she dared not ask. Why had he chosen her specifically? Was this truly about business, or was it, as she suspected, some manner of quiet punishment for her words at the ball, a way to keep her close enough to control, to remind her of her place? As they prepared to leave, Alaric walked them to the entrance himself, a gesture Elena found strangely formal, given his earlier coldness. At the door, her father stepped ahead to speak briefly with the butler about the carriage, leaving Elena and Alaric alone for a brief moment in the corridor. You did not have to accept, Alaric said quietly, his voice lower than before. You did not give me much choice, Elena replied. You know very well my father would not risk this arrangement over my discomfort. Perhaps, Alaric said, or perhaps I simply wished to see whether your courage at the ball was genuine, or merely a performance for an audience. Elena's eyes narrowed. And what have you concluded? I have not yet decided, he said. That is precisely why I require a few weeks to observe. How convenient for you, she said dryly. A business arrangement that doubles as an excuse to watch me squirm. Something flickered across his expression, something almost like amusement, though it vanished before she could be certain. If you find the arrangement unbearable, Miss Whitmore, you are free to leave at any time. I simply doubt your pride will allow it. My pride has nothing to do with honoring my father's business interests, Elena said firmly. Of course, Alaric said, though his tone suggested he did not entirely believe her. The following morning, Elena arrived at the estate with a single trunk of belongings, escorted by her father's carriage driver, who promised to return for her at the end of each week. Lady Beatrice, a stern but not unkind woman with silver-streaked hair and sharp eyes, greeted her at the entrance and led her to a modest but comfortable room on the estate's east wing. You will find the household runs on a strict schedule, Lady Beatrice said, as she showed Elena through the corridors. My nephew values order and discipline above almost everything else. I trust you will respect the rules of this house during your stay. Of course, my lady, Elena said politely, though she could not help but notice the underlying tension in Lady Beatrice's voice whenever she mentioned her nephew, as if there were things left carefully unspoken. Over the following days, Elena settled into a routine of reviewing shipping ledgers, inspecting fabric samples, and coordinating schedules with the estate's steward, a patient older man named Mr. Ellery, who seemed genuinely pleased to have someone with a sharp eye for detail assisting with the arrangements. She saw little of Alaric during the daytime hours, though she often felt his presence in the quiet corners of the estate, a shadow passing through corridors, a voice heard faintly through closed doors, giving instructions to servants in that same controlled, measured tone. It was on the fourth evening, as a sudden storm rolled in from the hills, that their paths crossed again in a manner neither of them expected. Elena had been walking along the covered garden path, checking on a shipment of silk that had been temporarily stored in the estate's outer building, when the storm broke without warning, thunder cracking loudly overhead, as rain began pouring in heavy sheets. She hurried toward the nearest shelter, a small stone stable near the edge of the garden, just as a streak of lightning split the sky and startled the horses inside into a frenzy. One horse, a tall black stallion, reared suddenly, breaking free from its loosely tied rope and bolting toward the open stable doors, directly where Elena stood, frozen in surprise. "Move!" The voice was sharp, commanding, and before Elena could fully process what was happening, strong hands gripped her shoulders and pulled her backward, just as the stallion thundered past, narrowly missing her. She stumbled against a solid chest, her heart pounding wildly, and looked up to find Alaric's face inches from hers, his gray eyes wide with something she had never seen in them before, genuine alarm. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough, stripped of its usual cold control. No," Elena managed, still trying to catch her breath. "I did not see him coming." Alaric's hands remained on her shoulders a moment longer than necessary before he seemed to realize the position they were in and stepped back abruptly, clearing his throat. "You should not wander near the stables during a storm," he said, though his voice lacked its usual sharpness. "The horses grow anxious with the thunder." "I did not realize a simple storm could cause such trouble," Elena said, attempting to steady her racing pulse with dry humor. "It is not merely the storm," Alaric said, glancing toward the stable, where two grooms were now working to calm the remaining horses. "That particular horse has always been unpredictable. My father favored him, despite his temperament." Something in his tone shifted at the mention of his father, a flicker of old grief passing briefly behind his eyes before the familiar composure returned. "Thank you," Elena said quietly, "for pulling me back." Alaric looked at her for a long moment, rain still dripping from his dark hair, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "I would not wish anyone injured on my estate, Miss Whitmore, business partner or otherwise." "Of course," Elena said, though something about the way he had looked at her moments before, the raw concern in his eyes, before he had time to guard it, told her his words were not entirely truthful. They stood in tense silence as the rain continued pouring outside the stable, neither willing to acknowledge the strange charge in the air between them, until Mr. Ellery arrived with an umbrella and escorted Elena back toward the main house, leaving Alaric standing alone near the stable entrance, watching her retreating figure with an expression far more troubled than the situation seemed to warrant. That night, unable to sleep, Elena sat by her window, watching the last of the storm clouds drift away, revealing a sky littered with stars. She thought of the moment in the stable, the strength in his hands, the genuine fear in his eyes, so different from the cold, controlled man she had encountered at the ball. There were layers to Duke Alaric Vane that she had not expected, layers hidden carefully beneath pride and formality, and despite her better judgment, she found herself increasingly curious to understand what secrets lay buried beneath them. She did not yet know that within the walls of this very estate, in a room she had never been permitted to enter, a far greater secret waited, one that would soon change everything between them. The days that followed the storm carried a strange new quiet between them, not the hostile silence of their first meetings, but something more careful, more measured, as if both were unsure how to navigate the shift that had occurred in the stable that night. Elena told herself it meant nothing, that gratitude and momentary fear did not erase weeks of coldness, yet she found her eyes drifting toward the corridors more often, listening for footsteps, wondering where he might be. It was on a quiet afternoon, while searching for Mr. Ellery to confirm a shipment schedule, that Elena first noticed something unusual about the estate's western wing. She had wandered further than intended, following a corridor she did not recognize, when she noticed a narrow staircase leading upward, guarded by a heavy door that remained firmly locked. She might have continued past, without a second thought, had it not been for the muffled voices drifting from somewhere above, hushed and urgent, followed by the unmistakable sound of a woman's weeping. Curiosity, the same curiosity that had gotten her into trouble more times than she could count, pulled her closer to the base of the staircase. She recognized one of the voices as belonging to Lady Beatrice, low and comforting, though strained with worry. The physician said the same thing again, Lady Beatrice was saying. There is little more he can do beyond easing her discomfort. A second voice, softer, weaker, responded, though Elena could not make out the words clearly. You must rest, Lady Beatrice continued. Alaric will not forgive himself if you push yourself further. Elena's heart quickened. Alaric, who was ill within these walls that his aunt spoke of with such gentle sorrow? A door creaked somewhere above, and footsteps began descending the staircase. Elena stepped back quickly, retreating around the corner just as Lady Beatrice emerged, her expression drawn and tired, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief before composing herself and continuing down the main corridor without noticing Elena hidden nearby. Elena remained still for a long moment, her mind racing. She knew she should return to her own duties, that whatever occurred within that locked room was none of her concern. Yet something about the weeping voice, the mention of a physician's failure, tugged at her curiosity and, unexpectedly, her sympathy. Over dinner that evening, shared quietly with Lady Beatrice while Alaric remained absent, citing estate business, Elena carefully broached the subject. The estate seems rather large for so few residents, she said casually, hoping to draw information without appearing too direct. Does anyone else live here besides yourself and the Duke? Lady Beatrice's hand paused briefly over her teacup before continuing, as if nothing had happened. The estate has housed our family for generations, Miss Whitmore. Many rooms remain simply for tradition's sake. Of course, Elena said, sensing the deflection, but choosing not to press further. Not yet. Later that night, unable to shake her curiosity, Elena found herself once again wandering toward the western corridor, drawn by something she could not fully explain. This time, as she approached the base of the staircase, she noticed the heavy door standing slightly ajar, light spilling faintly from within. She should have turned back. She knew this with absolute certainty even as her feet carried her forward, climbing the narrow stone steps until she reached a small landing with a single door, cracked open just enough to reveal a sliver of the room beyond. Inside, illuminated by soft candlelight, a young woman lay in a large canopied bed, her face pale, her dark hair spread across the pillows, her frame thin, in a way that spoke of prolonged illness rather than natural slenderness. She could not have been more than 17 or 18, her features delicate, almost fragile, though there was a quiet strength in the way she held herself upright against a stack of pillows, reading a book, despite what appeared to be considerable effort. Elena's breath caught. She had not expected to find someone so young, so clearly unwell, hidden away in this isolated corner of the estate. The young woman looked up suddenly, as if sensing the presence at her door, and her eyes, a familiar shade of gray, widened in surprise. "Oh," she said softly. "I did not realize anyone else was awake." Elena hesitated, torn between retreating and the sudden, overwhelming urge to know more. "I apologize," she said quietly, stepping back. "I did not mean to intrude." "Please, do not go," the young woman said, setting her book aside with visible effort. "I so rarely have visitors. You must be the merchant's daughter my brother mentioned. Elena, is it?" Elena blinked, surprised. "Your brother?" "Alaric," the young woman said, a small, tired smile crossing her pale lips. "I am Rosalind, his sister." Elena stepped further into the room, her earlier hesitation giving way to genuine concern as she took in the girl's frail appearance more closely. "I did not know the Duke had a sister residing here." Rosalind's smile faltered slightly. "He prefers to keep my condition private. He worries what people might say, or perhaps he simply worries in general. He has always worried too much, even when we were children." "Your condition?" Elena asked gently, moving closer to the bed. Rosalind hesitated, glancing toward the door, as if fearing someone might overhear. I have been unwell for nearly a year now, she admitted. The physicians have tried everything they know, yet I only grow weaker. Alaric refuses to accept that there may be nothing more to be done. Elena's chest tightened with a sudden, unexpected wave of sympathy. She thought of her own mother, of the years spent learning remedies and treatments at her side, before illness had taken her far too soon. She thought of the helplessness she had felt then, watching skilled healers fail to save the person she loved most. What symptoms have you experienced? Elena asked, before she could stop herself, old instincts rising to the surface. Rosalind studied her curiously. You sound as though you have some knowledge of medicine. My mother was a healer, Elena said. She taught me a great deal before she passed. I do not claim to be a physician, but I have seen many illnesses in my time helping her. Hope flickered briefly in Rosalind's tired eyes, quickly followed by uncertainty. Alaric would not approve of me discussing this with anyone outside the household physicians. Then perhaps we need not tell him, Elena said gently. Though even as she spoke the words, she knew how easily such secrecy could unravel. Before Rosalind could respond, heavy footsteps sounded on the staircase outside, followed by the unmistakable, sharp voice of Alaric, calling his sister's name with clear urgency. Elena's heart lurched. She had only a moment to step back from the bed, before the door swung open fully, revealing Alaric standing in the doorway, his expression shifting rapidly from concern to shock to something far colder, as his eyes landed on Elena, standing beside his sister's bed. What? He said slowly, each word carrying dangerous weight. Are you doing here? Alaric, please, Rosalind began, but he raised a hand, silencing her gently, without taking his eyes off Elena. I asked you a question, Miss Whitmore. I got lost while returning to my room, Elena said carefully, choosing her words with caution. I heard voices and came to investigate. I meant no harm. You meant no harm, Alaric repeated, his voice tight, with barely controlled anger. You entered a private room without permission and engaged my sister in conversation about matters that are none of your concern. Alaric. She was only being kind, Rosalind said weakly, though her brother's expression remained hard. This is precisely why I keep this matter private, Alaric said, turning briefly toward his sister, before returning his cold gaze to Elena. I will not have rumors spreading through the household, nor will I have strangers offering false hope where none exists. Elena felt heat rise to her cheeks, though whether from embarrassment or anger, she could not entirely say. I was not offering false hope. I was simply asking about her symptoms. My mother was a skilled healer, and I do not care what your mother was, Alaric snapped, his composure finally cracking under visible strain. This is my family, my responsibility. I will not have outsiders interfering in matters they do not understand, regardless of their intentions. The words stung more than Elena expected, though she refused to let it show. Forgive me for showing concern for a dying girl locked away in a tower like some forgotten secret. Alaric's eyes flashed with something sharp and wounded, quickly masked by anger. Leave! Now! Elena glanced once more at Rosalind, whose eyes had filled with tears, silently pleading for her not to argue further. With great reluctance, Elena nodded once and stepped past Alaric toward the door, pausing briefly at the threshold. For what it is worth, she said quietly, not turning back to face him. Hiding her away will not cure her. Sometimes the answers we need come from unexpected places, if only we are willing to look. She did not wait for a response, descending the staircase quickly, her heart pounding with a confusing mixture of anger, sympathy, and something else entirely, something that made the harshness of his words cut far deeper than she wanted to admit. Behind her, in the quiet room above, Alaric stood motionless beside his sister's bed, his hands clenched at his sides, torn between the fierce need to protect the one family member he had left, and the unwelcome realization that Elena's words, however unwanted, had touched a truth he had long refused to face. Rosalind reached for his hand weakly. She only wished to help Alaric. I know, he said quietly, his voice rough with something far more complicated than anger. That is precisely what frightens me. Outside, in the corridor below, Elena leaned against the cool stone wall, her breath finally steadying as she replayed the encounter over and over in her mind. She thought of Rosalind's pale face, her tired but hopeful eyes, and of Alaric's fierce, protective anger, so different from mere pride or cruelty. Whatever walls he had built around himself, whatever coldness he presented to the world, Elena now understood it stemmed from something far deeper than arrogance. It stemmed from fear, the quiet, desperate fear of losing the only family he had left. And despite his harsh words, despite the anger still burning in her chest, Elena found she could not simply forget what she had seen in that tower room, nor the flicker of hope that had briefly lit Rosalind's tired eyes at the mention of remedies beyond what physicians had already tried and failed. She resolved, quietly and firmly, that she would not simply walk away from this. Whatever the consequences, whatever Alaric's anger might bring, she could not turn her back on a dying girl when she might hold even the smallest chance of helping her. For 2 days following the confrontation in the tower room, Elena barely saw Alaric at all. He remained shut away in his study, or absent from the estate entirely, leaving instructions with Mr. Ellery, rather than speaking with her directly. The distance suited her, or so she told herself, though the memory of his harsh words and Rosalind's tired, hopeful eyes lingered constantly at the edges of her thoughts. She continued her duties with the shipping ledgers and fabric samples during the day, but her evenings were spent quietly researching, pulling from memory every remedy her mother had taught her, every treatment for wasting illnesses, weakness, and unexplained fatigue. She wrote notes late into the night by candlelight, cross-referencing symptoms Rosalind had briefly described against the herbal knowledge passed down from her mother, a woman whose reputation as a healer had once brought people from neighboring villages seeking her help. On the third evening, as Elena crossed the main hall on her way to the small library the estate kept for guests, she nearly collided with Lady Beatrice, whose face was pale and drawn with visible worry. "Lady Beatrice," Elena said, steadying the older woman gently, "is something wrong?" "The physician was here again this afternoon," Lady Beatrice said, her voice trembling slightly. "He says there is little more to be done beyond keeping her comfortable. Alaric refuses to accept it, but I fear we are running out of options." Elena's chest tightened. "What exactly are her symptoms? If you would permit me to understand fully, perhaps I might be of some help." Lady Beatrice studied her for a long moment, clearly torn between loyalty to her nephew's wishes and desperate hope for any possible solution. "She grows weaker by the week," she finally admitted. "She has little appetite, terrible fatigue, occasional fevers that come and go without warning, and a persistent weakness in her limbs that the physicians cannot explain. They have tried bloodletting, tonics, complete rest, all without success." Elena's mind raced through possibilities, old lessons from her mother surfacing rapidly. The combination of symptoms sounded less like a mysterious wasting disease and more like something her mother had once treated in a village woman years ago, a condition caused by poor circulation of the blood, combined with a deficiency in certain foods, worsened by the physician's insistence on excessive rest and restrictive diets meant to conserve strength, which in this case may have done the opposite. "I believe I may know what could help her," Elena said carefully. "But I would need to speak with the Duke directly, and I fear he will not welcome my involvement, given our last encounter." Lady Beatrice's eyes filled with something between hope and desperation. "If there is even the smallest chance you could help her, I will speak with him myself. Please, Miss Whitmore, I have watched that girl grow weaker for nearly a year now, and I cannot bear to watch her fade away without at least attempting every possibility." True to her word, Lady Beatrice arranged for Elena to speak with Alaric that very evening in his study. Elena arrived with her notes carefully organized, her nerves steady, despite the memory of his anger still fresh in her mind. Alaric stood by the window when she entered, his back turned, his posture stiff with barely contained tension. He did not turn immediately, and Elena waited in silence, refusing to be the first to speak. "My aunt tells me you believe you can help my sister," he finally said, turning to face her, his expression carefully guarded. "I believe there is a possibility," Elena said honestly. "Based on the symptoms your aunt described, I suspect your physicians may be treating the wrong cause entirely. My mother once treated a similar case, a condition caused by weakness in the blood, combined with insufficient nourishment, made worse, rather than better by excessive rest and restricted diet. My sister has been examined by the finest physicians in the region," Alaric said sharply. "You expect me to believe a merchant's daughter with no formal training has identified something they have missed? I do not claim to know more than trained physicians," Elena said, keeping her voice steady despite his obvious skepticism. But sometimes those trained in formal medicine overlook simpler explanations in favor of more complicated theories. My mother's remedies were unconventional, yet they saved lives that formal medicine had already given up on. Alaric studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, though Elena could see the internal struggle behind his eyes, the fierce desire to protect his sister warring against his pride, and his distrust of anything outside proper medical authority. "And if your remedies fail?" he asked quietly. "If you make her condition worse rather than better? Then you will have every right to send me away and never speak to me again," Elena said. "But if there is even a small chance I could help her, would you truly rather do nothing, simply because the suggestion comes from someone you dislike?" His jaw tightened at her words, and for a long moment, silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken tension. "I do not dislike you," he said finally, his voice quieter than before, almost reluctant. "I distrust circumstances I cannot control. My sister's life is not something I am willing to gamble carelessly." "Then do not gamble," Elena said. "Allow me to observe her condition properly, to prepare simple remedies alongside, not in place of, whatever your physicians recommend. If nothing improves within a week, I will step aside entirely and trouble you no further." Alaric remained silent for a long moment, clearly weighing her proposal against his own fears and pride. Finally, he exhaled slowly, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "1 week," he said, "and you will inform me of everything you intend to give her before administering anything at all." "Agreed," Elena said, relief flooding through her chest. Despite the agreement, the following days proved more difficult than Elena anticipated. Alaric insisted on being present during her visits to Rosalind's room, watching her every movement with careful, guarded eyes, questioning each remedy she suggested with a barrage of concerns that tested her patience repeatedly. "Why iron-rich broth specifically?" he asked one afternoon, watching as Elena prepared a simple mixture of beef broth, combined with dark leafy greens, and a small measure of blackstrap molasses, a remedy her mother had used for cases of blood weakness. "Weak blood requires proper nourishment to rebuild itself," Elena explained patiently, though his constant questioning tested her nerves more than she wanted to admit. "Restricting her diet, as your physician suggested, may have deprived her body of exactly what it needed most." Rosalind, propped up against her pillows, watched the exchange with quiet amusement despite her evident exhaustion. "You two argue more than an old married couple," she said weakly, earning a sharp look from her brother and a faint blush from Elena. "We are not arguing," Alaric said stiffly. "I am simply ensuring your safety." "Of course," Rosalind said, though her small smile suggested she was not entirely convinced. Over the following days, Elena carefully monitored small changes in Rosalind's condition, adjusting remedies based on her responses, encouraging gentle movement rather than complete rest, and preparing simple, nourishing meals designed to rebuild her strength gradually, rather than overwhelming her weakened body all at once. Slowly, subtly, Elena began noticing small improvements. Rosalind's appetite increased slightly. Her complexion, though still pale, lost some of its ghostly pallor. She managed short walks around her room with less exhaustion than before, and her fevers, while not entirely absent, grew less frequent. Alaric noticed these changes as well, his skepticism slowly giving way to cautious hope, though he remained careful not to voice it too openly, as if fearing that acknowledging progress might somehow undo it. It was on the 6th night, just as Elena allowed herself to believe they were finally making genuine progress, that everything changed without warning. She had retired to her room for the evening, exhausted from a long day of preparing remedies and monitoring Rosalind's condition, when a frantic knock sounded at her door. She opened it to find one of the estate's younger maids, her face pale with fear. "Miss Whitmore," the girl said breathlessly. "Please, you must come quickly. Lady Rosalind has taken a terrible turn. The Duke is asking for you." Elena's heart lurched painfully as she grabbed her shawl and hurried after the maid through the darkened corridors, dread pooling heavily in her stomach. Whatever progress they had made over the past week suddenly felt fragile, uncertain, threatened by whatever crisis now awaited her in the tower room above. As she climbed the staircase 2 steps at a time, she could hear Alaric's voice through the door, uncharacteristically frantic. calling his sister's name with a desperation that revealed, more clearly than any words could, exactly how much this fragile, weakened young woman meant to a man who had built his entire life around protecting her. Elena reached the door and pushed it open, bracing herself for whatever crisis waited within, understanding with sudden, sharp clarity that the coming hours would determine far more than simply Rosalind's health. They would determine whether the fragile trust growing between herself and Alaric could survive its first true test, or whether it would shatter entirely beneath the weight of fear, grief, and the terrible uncertainty of a life hanging delicately in the balance. Rosalind lay curled on her side, her body trembling with fever, her skin damp with sweat despite the coolness of the room. Her breathing came in shallow, rapid gasps, and her eyes, when they fluttered open briefly, seemed unfocused, distant, as if she were slipping somewhere beyond reach. Alaric knelt beside the bed, one hand pressed gently against his sister's forehead, his usual composure completely shattered, replaced by raw, unguarded fear. When he looked up at Elena in the doorway, his eyes held none of their usual coldness, only desperate, pleading urgency. "She woke screaming from the pain in her limbs," he said, his voice rough. "Then the fever came on so quickly. I do not understand what has happened. Everything was improving." Elena moved quickly to the bedside, pressing the back of her hand against Rosalind's burning forehead, her mind racing through possibilities. A sudden high fever, combined with painful limbs and disorientation, after days of gradual improvement, suggested something beyond simple weakness in the blood, something that required immediate, careful attention, rather than panic. "Has she eaten anything unusual today?" Elena asked, keeping her voice calm, despite her own racing heart. "Anything different from what we prepared together?" "The kitchen staff prepared her usual broth," Alaric said. "Nothing changed, I swear it." Elena examined Rosalind's arms carefully, noting a faint rash beginning to spread across her wrists, small and easily missed, unless one knew to look for it. Her mother had once treated a similar case, a reaction that occurred when the body, weakened over a long illness, suddenly began rebuilding strength too quickly, causing a temporary but frightening surge of fever, as the body's natural defenses reacted strongly to the changes occurring within it. "I believe her body may be reacting to the sudden improvement in her strength," Elena said carefully, though uncertainty edged her voice. "It happens sometimes, when someone has been weakened for a long period and begins recovering quickly. The body responds with fever and pain as it adjusts." "You believe," Alaric repeated sharply, panic bleeding into his tone. "You are not certain?" "I am not a physician, with years of formal training," Elena said honestly, meeting his eyes steadily, despite the fear evident in them. "But I have seen this pattern before, and I believe I know how to help her through it, if you are willing to trust me completely tonight, without hesitation or argument." For a long, tense moment, Alaric said nothing, his eyes searching hers, as if trying to determine whether to place his sister's life entirely in the hands of someone he had spent weeks distrusting. Finally, something in his expression shifted, a decision made. "Tell me what you need," he said quietly. "I will not question you further tonight." Relief and determination flooded through Elena in equal measure. "I need cool water, clean cloths, and the ginger root and honey mixture from my supplies downstairs. I also need someone to prepare a light broth with extra salt, to help her body retain the fluids she will lose from the fever." Alaric immediately called for the servants, relaying Elena's instructions with an urgency that sent the household staff scrambling through the darkened corridors. Within minutes, supplies began arriving, and Elena set to work, soaking cloths in cool water and pressing them gently against Rosalind's forehead, neck, and wrists to help ease the fever's grip. "Rosalind," Elena said softly, taking the young woman's trembling hand in her own. "I need you to try to drink a little water for me, just small sips." Rosalind's eyes fluttered open weakly, focusing with visible effort on Elena's face. "It hurts," she whispered. "Everywhere hurts." "I know," Elena said gently. "But this pain means your body is healing, growing stronger. I promise you, we will get through this together." Through the long hours of the night, Elena worked tirelessly, alternating cool compresses with small sips of water and broth, watching carefully for any sign of the fever breaking or worsening. Alaric remained by his sister's side throughout, holding her other hand, murmuring quiet words of comfort between anxious glances toward Elena, silently seeking reassurance with every subtle change in his sister's condition. Around midnight, the fever spiked dangerously high, and Rosalind began shivering uncontrollably, despite the heat radiating from her skin. Panic flickered across Alaric's face as he looked toward Elena.
What is happening? Why is she shivering if the fever has not broken?
This is normal, though frightening to witness, Elena said, keeping her voice steady despite her own racing pulse. The body sometimes shivers as it works to fight the fever. We must keep cooling her gently, not too harshly, and continue with small amounts of fluid. She worked quickly, adjusting the cloths, murmuring quiet reassurances to Rosalind, whose eyes remained closed now, her breathing labored but steady. Alaric watched Elena's careful, confident movements, with something between awe and desperate hope, his earlier skepticism entirely forgotten in the face of her calm determination. "How do you know all of this?" he asked quietly during a brief lull, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "How can you remain so calm?" "I am not calm," Elena admitted honestly. "I am terrified. But my mother taught me that panic helps no one, especially not the person suffering. She always said a healer's hands must remain steady, even when their heart is breaking." Alaric studied her for a long moment, something shifting behind his tired gray eyes, a recognition of strength and depth he had not previously allowed himself to see in her. "Your mother sounds as though she was a remarkable woman." "She was," Elena said softly, her own eyes glistening briefly with unshed tears. "I only wish she were here now, to guide me properly." "She has guided you well enough," Alaric said quietly. "I see her wisdom in everything you have done tonight." The compliment, so unexpected and genuine, caught Elena off guard, and for a brief moment, their eyes met over Rosalind's trembling form, something passing silently between them that neither dared name amid the crisis surrounding them. As the first hints of dawn began creeping through the curtains, Rosalind's fever finally began to break, her breathing steadying into something calmer, more natural. The shivering subsided gradually, replaced by a peaceful, exhausted sleep, her small hand relaxing within Elena's grip. Elena pressed her fingers gently against Rosalind's forehead, relief flooding through her exhausted body as she felt the fever's heat finally receding. "It is breaking," she whispered. "She will be all right." Alaric's shoulders sagged with visible relief, his hand tightening around his sister's smaller one as he bowed his head briefly, whispering words too quiet for Elena to hear, though she suspected they were words of gratitude, directed toward whatever higher power he believed had guided them through the night. When he finally raised his head, his eyes met Elena's across the bed, red-rimmed with exhaustion and unshed emotion, and for the first time since their initial meeting at the ball weeks ago, there was no coldness in his gaze whatsoever, only raw, unguarded gratitude. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I do not know how to properly express what you have done for us tonight." "You do not need to," Elena said gently, exhaustion finally catching up with her own body as the adrenaline of the crisis began to fade. "Seeing her recover is thanks enough." Alaric studied her for a long moment, something soft and unguarded passing behind his tired eyes. "I judged you unfairly," he admitted quietly. "From the very first night we met, I allowed my pride to blind me to your character. I see now how wrong I was." Elena felt warmth spread through her chest despite her exhaustion, though she kept her voice light, unwilling to let the moment become too heavy given the circumstances. "Perhaps we simply began on the wrong foot entirely, my lord." "Perhaps," Alaric said, and for the first time, something that might have been a genuine smile tugged at the corner of his lips, faint and tired, but undeniably real. As the morning light spread gently across the room, illuminating Rosalind's peaceful, sleeping form, Elena allowed herself, for the first time since arriving at the estate, to believe that something meaningful had shifted between herself and the proud, guarded Duke, who had once despised her so completely. Whatever walls had separated them, however deep his pride had run, tonight had cracked something open between them, something neither of them could easily close again. Yet even as hope bloomed quietly within her exhausted heart, Elena could not shake the feeling that this crisis, however successfully navigated, was merely the beginning of a far longer journey, one filled with challenges neither of them could yet fully anticipate. In the days following the crisis, the entire atmosphere of the Vane estate seemed to shift, as though a long-held breath had finally been released. Rosalind's recovery progressed steadily, her strength returning day by day. Her laughter, once so rare within those quiet stone walls, now echoing more frequently through the corridors, as she grew well enough to sit up unassisted, then to walk short distances with only occasional support. Elena continued overseeing her care, adjusting remedies as Rosalind's strength improved, though the desperate urgency of that first crisis night gradually gave way to a calmer, more hopeful routine. She found herself spending increasing amounts of time in Rosalind's company, not merely as a healer attending a patient, but as something closer to genuine friendship blossoming between two young women who, despite their different circumstances, shared a similar spirit of quiet resilience. "You must tell me everything about your life before coming here," Rosalind said one afternoon, propped comfortably against her pillows, while Elena prepared a fresh pot of the herbal tea that had become part of her daily regimen. "I have spent so long confined to this room that I have grown desperately curious about the world beyond these walls." Elena smiled, settling into the chair beside the bed. "There is not much excitement to tell, I am afraid. My days were mostly spent helping my father with his business, or accompanying my mother on her visits to families in need of her remedies." "That sounds far more interesting than you give it credit for," Rosalind said. "I have always envied people with purpose, people who spend their days doing something meaningful, rather than simply existing within the confines of expectation." "You have more purpose than you realize," Elena said gently. "Your recovery alone has given your brother more hope and joy than I believe he has allowed himself to feel in a very long time." Rosalind's expression softened, though a shadow of old sadness passed briefly behind her eyes. "Alaric has sacrificed so much for me over the years. Since our parents passed when I was young, he has carried the entire weight of this estate, this family, entirely on his own shoulders. I sometimes worry he has forgotten how to simply live, rather than merely endure." "What happened to your parents, if you do not mind me asking?" Elena asked carefully. Rosalind was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the edge of her blanket absently. "A fever took our mother when I was 12, quite similar, actually, to what I experienced the other night, though far more severe. Our father never quite recovered from the grief, and within 2 years, his own health failed as well. Alaric was only 20 when he inherited the entire estate, along with the full responsibility of raising me." Elena's chest tightened with sympathy, understanding suddenly the deep well of protectiveness she had witnessed in Alaric since her arrival, the fierce, almost desperate need to shield his sister from further suffering after having already lost so much. "That explains a great deal about his behavior," Elena said softly. "The coldness, the strict control over everything within these walls. He believes that if he controls every variable carefully enough, he can prevent further tragedy," Rosalind said. "He does not realize that such control only isolates him further from the very connections that might bring him genuine happiness." Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock at the door, and both women looked up as Alaric himself entered, carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers he had clearly gathered from the estate's gardens. "I thought these might brighten the room," he said, somewhat awkwardly, clearly unaccustomed to such gestures. Rosalind's eyes lit up with genuine delight. "Alaric, they are lovely. Thank you." He set the flowers in a vase near the window before turning to Elena, his expression far warmer than it had been during their earliest encounters. "How is she progressing today?" "Remarkably well," Elena said. "Her strength continues improving steadily, and I believe within another week or two, she may be well enough to venture outside for short walks in the garden." Rosalind's face brightened further at the prospect. "Truly? I have missed the garden terribly." "We shall see," Alaric said, though his tone carried none of its former sharpness, only gentle affection tinged with lingering protectiveness. As Elena gathered her supplies to leave the two siblings to their visit, Alaric fell into step beside her, walking with her toward the door. "Might I speak with you privately for a moment?" he asked quietly, once they stood in the corridor outside Rosalind's room. "Of course," Elena said, curious despite herself. He led her toward a nearby window, overlooking the estate's extensive gardens, the afternoon sunlight casting warm golden light across his features, softer somehow than she remembered from their earlier encounters. "I owe you a proper apology," he said, his gaze fixed on the gardens below, rather than meeting her eyes directly. "Not merely for my behavior the night I discovered you in Rosalind's room, but for my treatment of you since our very first meeting at the ball." Elena remained silent, sensing he needed space to continue without interruption. I judged you harshly that night, he continued, not because your words were untrue, but because they were. I had grown so accustomed to people flattering me, telling me only what I wished to hear, that genuine honesty felt like an attack, rather than what it truly was, a rare gift. Why did you treat that servant boy so harshly that evening? Elena asked gently, genuinely curious now, rather than accusatory. Alaric was quiet for a long moment before answering. In truth, I do not fully understand it myself. I believe the accumulated weight of managing this estate, of watching my sister grow weaker despite every effort, of feeling utterly powerless against forces I could not control, had built into something I could no longer contain. That boy simply became an unfortunate outlet for frustrations that had nothing to do with him at all. That does not excuse the cruelty, Elena said carefully, though her tone held no judgment, merely quiet understanding. No, Alaric agreed, it does not excuse it, but I hope it explains it, at least partially. I have since ensured that boy received proper compensation for that evening, along with my personal apology. Elena studied him, surprised by this admission. You apologized to him? Your words that night, however painful to hear, were entirely correct, Alaric said. I had allowed my own suffering to blind me to basic human decency. I owed him far more than a mere apology, though it was the very least I could offer. Something warm bloomed in Elena's chest at this revelation, a growing respect for a man willing to acknowledge his own faults so openly, so honestly. That took considerable courage, she said softly. Considerably less courage than you displayed the night my sister's fever nearly overwhelmed her, Alaric said, finally turning to meet her eyes directly. I have never witnessed such calm strength in the face of such genuine terror. You saved her life, Elena. I do not believe I can ever properly repay such a debt. The use of her given name, rather than the formal address he had maintained since their first meeting, sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. You owe me nothing, she said. Watching her recover has been reward enough. Nevertheless, Alaric said, I find myself wishing to know you better, beyond the confines of this business arrangement between our families. Would you consider accompanying me on a walk through the gardens this evening, once your duties for the day are complete? Elena's heart quickened unexpectedly at the invitation, though she kept her expression carefully composed. I believe I would enjoy that very much, my lord. Alaric, he corrected gently. Please, call me Alaric, at least when we are not required to maintain formalities for the sake of others. Alaric, Elena repeated softly, testing the name, finding it fit far more comfortably than she expected. That evening, as the sun began setting behind the distant hills, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, Elena walked alongside Alaric through the estate's extensive gardens, their conversation flowing easily between topics both light and meaningful, laughter occasionally breaking the quiet evening air, in a manner that would have seemed impossible mere weeks earlier. They spoke of childhood memories, of dreams neither had previously shared with anyone beyond their closest family, of quiet fears and hopeful ambitions that revealed depths to each other's characters previously hidden beneath layers of pride, formality, and mutual misunderstanding. As they paused beside a small fountain at the garden's center, the last light of sunset casting a warm glow across their faces, Alaric turned to Elena with an expression she had never seen him wear before, open, unguarded, genuinely warm. I confess, he said quietly, that I find myself looking forward to your company more than I anticipated when this arrangement first began. As do I, Elena admitted softly, surprising herself with the honesty of her own words. Neither spoke further as they continued their walk beneath the darkening sky, yet something unspoken had settled comfortably between them, a quiet understanding that whatever had begun as bitter rivalry weeks earlier was steadily, gently transforming into something neither of them had expected, nor were entirely certain how to name. Unbeknownst to either of them, however, their growing closeness had not gone entirely unnoticed, and within the wider circles of society, beyond the estate's quiet walls, whispers had already begun to stir, whispers that would soon threaten everything they had so carefully, so gently built between them. Over the following weeks, Rosalind's recovery continued its steady progress, and with it, the bond between Elena and Alaric deepened in ways neither had anticipated when their arrangement first began. Their evening walks through the garden became a cherished routine, conversations stretching longer each night, as the walls both had once maintained so carefully continued to soften. Rosalind, delighted by her growing strength, took particular pleasure in observing the change in her brother, teasing him gently whenever he returned from an evening walk with Elena, his expression noticeably lighter than she had seen in years. "You are smiling again," Rosalind remarked one morning, watching her brother from her seat near the window as he reviewed correspondence at her bedside table. "I had nearly forgotten what that looked like on your face." "I smile often enough," Alaric said, though the faint color rising in his cheeks suggested otherwise. "Not like this," Rosalind said, her tone gently teasing. "This particular smile only appears after your walks with Elena." "We simply discuss estate matters," Alaric said, though his attempt at nonchalance fooled neither of them. "Of course," Rosalind said, her knowing smile widening. "Estate matters that require sunset walks through the garden and conversations lasting well past dinner." Alaric said nothing further, though the faint smile tugging at his lips confirmed everything his sister had already suspected. As Rosalind's strength continued improving, the household staff began preparing for a modest gathering to celebrate her recovery, a small dinner attended by several close family friends and business associates, including members of the region's prominent families who had long wondered about the mysterious absence of the Duke's sister from public life. Elena found herself invited to attend as well, given her role in Rosalind's recovery, though the prospect filled her with unexpected nervousness. She had grown comfortable within the private world of the estate, but re-entering wider society, particularly alongside Alaric, carried implications she was not entirely certain how to navigate. "You look lovely," Alaric said when she descended the staircase on the evening of the gathering, wearing a modest but elegant gown of deep blue that Lady Beatrice had insisted upon providing for the occasion. "Thank you," Elena said, feeling a flush of warmth at the genuine admiration evident in his expression. "I confess, I feel somewhat out of place among such distinguished company." "You need not worry," Alaric said, offering his arm as they made their way toward the dining hall. "You have earned your place here through far greater accomplishment than mere birthright." The dinner proceeded pleasantly enough, Rosalind glowing with happiness as she greeted guests she had not seen in nearly a year, her recovery drawing genuine astonishment and warm congratulations from those present. Elena remained largely at the edges of conversation, content to watch the joy spreading through the gathering, until a striking young woman, with golden hair and sharp, calculating eyes, approached her with a smile that did not quite reach her gaze. "You must be Miss Whitmore," the woman said smoothly. "I have heard a great deal about you recently. I am Lady Charlotte Ashworth." Elena recognized the name immediately from earlier conversations with Lady Beatrice, a family of considerable standing, whose daughter had long been rumored as a suitable match for the Duke, given their family's long-standing connections. "A pleasure to meet you, Lady Charlotte," Elena said politely, though something in the other woman's expression made her instinctively wary. "I understand you have been staying at the estate for some weeks now," Charlotte continued, her tone light, but her eyes sharp, with poorly concealed curiosity. "Assisting with business matters, I believe, though I confess I find it rather unusual for a merchant's daughter to spend quite so much time under the same roof as an unmarried duke." "The arrangement has been entirely proper," Elena said evenly, refusing to let the subtle insinuation unsettle her composure. "Lady Beatrice has ensured everything remains within appropriate bounds." "Of course," Charlotte said, her smile widening slightly, though it carried a coldness that belied its warmth. "I only mention it out of concern for your reputation, Miss Whitmore. Society can be rather unforgiving toward young women who spend extended periods in such close quarters with eligible bachelors, regardless of the circumstances." Before Elena could respond, Alaric approached, his expression polite, though carrying an underlying wariness, as he greeted Charlotte formally. "Lady Charlotte," he said, "I trust you are enjoying the evening." "Immensely," Charlotte said, her attention shifting seamlessly to Alaric, her demeanor warming considerably. "I was simply expressing my admiration for Miss Whitmore's dedication to your sister's recovery. Such devotion is truly remarkable, particularly given how little she stands to gain from the arrangement, beyond, of course, the obvious benefits of extended proximity to your household." The subtle barb was not lost on Elena, though Alaric's expression remained carefully neutral. giving no indication he had caught the underlying insinuation. "Miss Whitmore's dedication has saved my sister's life," Alaric said firmly. "I owe her a debt I can scarcely begin to repay." "How fortunate for her," Charlotte said smoothly, her eyes flickering briefly toward Elena, with an expression that promised the conversation was far from finished, despite its polite conclusion for the evening. As the dinner continued, Elena noticed Charlotte watching her and Alaric closely throughout the remainder of the evening, her gaze calculating whenever their conversation grew too easy, too comfortable, too clearly affectionate for mere business associates. Later, as the guests began departing and Elena found herself briefly alone near the terrace doors, Charlotte approached once more, her earlier polite mask slipping slightly to reveal something colder beneath. "A word of advice, Miss Whitmore," Charlotte said quietly, ensuring they were not overheard. "The Duke's family has significant expectations regarding suitable matches for someone of his standing. Whatever fondness may have developed between you during your time here would be wise to remember its proper limits. Men of his position rarely marry beneath their station, regardless of temporary affections that may arise from gratitude or proximity." "I have no expectations regarding the Duke, beyond mutual respect and professional courtesy," Elena said firmly, though Charlotte's words landed with more sting than she wished to admit. "Of course," Charlotte said, her smile returning, though it held no warmth whatsoever. "I simply thought it kind to offer clarity, before misunderstandings grow too large to easily correct." She departed with a final, knowing smile, leaving Elena standing alone near the terrace, her earlier joy from the evening now tinged with unwelcome uncertainty. Alaric found her there moments later, his expression concerned as he noticed the change in her demeanor. "Is something troubling you?" "It is nothing," Elena said, forcing a smile despite the unease still churning within her. "Merely the exhaustion of an eventful evening." Alaric studied her for a moment, clearly unconvinced, though he did not press further, sensing perhaps that whatever troubled her required more careful handling than a public gathering allowed. "Walk with me," he said instead, offering his arm. They stepped out onto the terrace together, the cool night air a welcome relief after the warmth of the crowded dining hall. For several minutes, they walked in comfortable silence before Alaric finally spoke. "Lady Charlotte has always possessed a rather sharp tongue," he said carefully, watching Elena's reaction closely. "Whatever she said to you, I hope you will not take it too seriously." Elena glanced at him, surprised he had noticed the earlier exchange, despite his apparent distraction with other guests. "You saw?" "I noticed her expression when she approached you," Alaric said. It was not difficult to guess the nature of her comments, given her history. "Her history?" Elena asked curiously. "Our families have long maintained connections," Alaric said carefully. "There have been expectations, unspoken though persistent, that Charlotte and I might eventually make a suitable match. Expectations I have never personally shared, though she has clearly held on to them regardless." Elena's chest tightened at this revelation, understanding suddenly the source of Charlotte's poorly concealed hostility. "I see. Whatever she said to you," Alaric continued, stopping and turning to face her fully beneath the soft glow of the terrace lanterns. "I want you to understand that my feelings toward you are not born from gratitude alone, nor from mere proximity, as she likely suggested." Elena's heart quickened at his words, at the sincerity evident in his expression. "Alaric, I have come to care for you deeply, Elena," he said quietly, his voice carrying a vulnerability she had never witnessed from him before. "Not because of what you have done for my sister, though that debt remains immeasurable, but because of who you are, your honesty, your courage, your unwavering kindness, despite the coldness I once showed you. I find myself drawn to you in ways I have never experienced before." Elena's breath caught, her own heart swelling with emotions she had been carefully guarding since their earliest walks together. "I care for you as well," she admitted softly, "more than I believed possible, given how we began." A genuine smile spread across Alaric's face, transforming his features into something Elena had rarely witnessed, open joy, unburdened by pride or caution. For a long moment, they simply stood together beneath the stars, the earlier tension from Charlotte's veiled threats momentarily forgotten in the warmth of shared understanding. Yet even as hope bloomed brightly within Elena's heart, she could not entirely dismiss the unease Charlotte's words had planted, nor the awareness that whatever growing affection existed between herself and Alaric would not go unchallenged by those who believed she did not belong within his world. The whispers had already begun, and Elena understood, with quiet certainty, that far greater challenges awaited them both in the days ahead. The days following the dinner gathering passed pleasantly enough, Rosalind's continued recovery, bringing genuine warmth to the household, and the bond between Elena and Alaric deepening with each passing evening. Yet beneath the surface of this newfound happiness, trouble had already begun brewing. Carried quietly through the whispered conversations of society circles, Elena had no direct access to observe. It began subtly, a comment here, a knowing glance there, until nearly a week after the dinner, Lady Beatrice approached Elena, with visible concern etched across her features. "There is something you should know," Lady Beatrice said, drawing Elena aside into the privacy of the estate's small library. "Rumors have begun circulating through society regarding your presence here." Elena's stomach tightened with unease. "What sort of rumors?" "Lady Charlotte has apparently been suggesting, rather insistently, that your involvement in Rosalind's care was merely a calculated scheme," Lady Beatrice said carefully. "That your true intention from the beginning was to secure Alaric's affection, and through it, access to his fortune and title." Elena felt as though the air had been knocked from her lungs. "That is entirely untrue. I never sought his affection, nor his fortune. I only wished to help Rosalind." "I believe you," Lady Beatrice said gently, "but rumors, once released into society, take on a life of their own, regardless of truth. I fear this particular rumor has spread further than we initially realized." Elena's mind raced, understanding immediately the potential damage such rumors could cause, not only to her own reputation, but to her father's business standing within society. "Does Alaric know?" "I do not believe so, not yet," Lady Beatrice said, "though I suspect it is only a matter of time before such talk reaches his ears, particularly given Charlotte's evident determination to ensure it does." Elena's fears proved justified far sooner than she anticipated. That very evening, as she made her way toward the garden for their now customary walk, she found Alaric waiting near the fountain, his expression troubled in a way she had not witnessed since their earliest, most hostile encounters. "Alaric," she said, approaching cautiously, sensing immediately that something had shifted. "Is something wrong?" "I received a letter today," he said, his voice carefully controlled, though tension radiated from his rigid posture. "From a business associate whose family maintains close connections within society circles." Elena's heart sank, understanding immediately what the letter must have contained. "What did it say?" "It suggested," Alaric said slowly, each word measured with obvious difficulty, "that your presence here has never been about my sister's health at all, but rather, a carefully orchestrated attempt to secure my affection, and through it, access to my family's fortune." "That is not true," Elena said immediately, her voice firm, despite the hurt blooming in her chest, at the very suggestion. "You know that is not true, Alaric. You have witnessed everything I have done for Rosalind these past weeks." "I want to believe that," Alaric said, though something guarded had crept back into his expression. Walls, she had thought long since dismantled, beginning to reconstruct themselves before her eyes. "But I cannot deny that circumstances have aligned rather conveniently in your favor. A merchant's daughter, given extended access to my household, my sister, myself, culminating in growing affection between us, that conveniently secures your family's business interests, alongside considerable social advancement." Elena felt as though she had been struck, the accusation cutting far deeper than Charlotte's earlier veiled threats. "You truly believe I calculated all of this? That I watched your sister suffer through fever and pain, merely as some elaborate scheme?" "I do not know what to believe," Alaric said, his voice tight with visible internal conflict. "I have been wrong about people before, Elena. I trusted advisors who ultimately sought only to benefit themselves at my family's expense. I cannot afford to be so easily deceived again, not when my sister's well-being, my family's legacy, remains at stake." "Then you truly know nothing about my character at all," Elena said, hurt rapidly transforming into anger. "Despite everything we have shared these past weeks, every conversation, every moment of vulnerability, you would so easily believe the poisonous words of a jealous woman over the evidence of your own eyes?" "I did not say I believed her entirely," Alaric said, though his tone lacked the conviction necessary to reassure her. I only said, I cannot dismiss the possibility entirely, given what is at stake. Elena felt tears, threatening at the corners of her eyes, though she refused to let them fall in front of him. I came into your household because your sister was suffering, and I could not bear to watch her fade away without at least attempting to help. Everything since then, every walk, every conversation, every moment I have shared with you, has been genuine. If you cannot see that, if weeks of evidence mean less to you than the jealous scheming of a woman who has never once shown genuine concern for your sister's well-being, then perhaps I was wrong about your character as well. Elena, Alaric began, his expression finally cracking to reveal genuine distress beneath his earlier guardedness. No, Elena said, stepping back from him, her voice trembling now with barely contained emotion. I will not defend myself further against accusations that should require no defense at all, not after everything we have shared. I think it best I return home for now, until you have decided which version of my character you truly believe. She turned and walked swiftly back toward the house, ignoring Alaric's calls for her to wait, tears finally spilling freely down her cheeks, once she was certain he could no longer see her face clearly in the darkness. That very night, Elena packed her belongings, informing Lady Beatrice through a brief, tearful conversation that she believed it best to return to her family home, at least until matters settled more clearly. Lady Beatrice, clearly troubled by the sudden turn of events, attempted to convince her to stay, to allow Alaric time to reconsider his hasty judgment, but Elena's resolve remained firm. I cannot remain in a household where my character is so easily questioned, Elena said quietly, fastening the last clasp on her travel trunk. Whatever affection has grown between myself and the Duke these past weeks, it cannot survive if built upon such fragile trust. Rosalind, informed of the sudden departure, insisted on seeing Elena before she left, tears streaming down her own face as she embraced her friend tightly. Please do not leave, Rosalind pleaded. My brother is a proud, foolish man, but I know his heart. He does not truly believe those horrible rumors, not deep down. He is simply frightened, as he has always been, of losing something precious ever again. I understand his fear, Elena said gently, returning the embrace despite her own heartbreak. But understanding does not erase the pain of being so quickly doubted, especially after everything we have shared. Please, Rosalind said again, her voice breaking. Give him time. I promise you, he will realize his mistake. Elena kissed Rosalind's forehead gently, unable to make promises she was not certain she could keep. Take care of yourself, Rosalind. Continue the remedies exactly as we discussed, and please, write to me if your condition changes in any way. With that, Elena departed the Vane estate in the early hours of the morning, her carriage rolling away down the long gravel drive as the first light of dawn began spreading across the horizon, leaving behind a household fractured by doubt, grief, and the painful weight of words that could not easily be unspoken. Alaric watched her departure from his study window, his heart heavy with regret he could not yet bring himself to voice, torn between the fierce protective instincts that had governed his life for years and the growing, undeniable awareness that in his moment of fear, he had wounded the very person who had given his sister back her life. He did not yet know how deeply his hasty words would come to haunt him, nor how close he had come to losing something far more precious than fortune or reputation could ever replace. The days following Elena's departure passed slowly within the Vane estate, an unfamiliar heaviness settling over the household that had so recently known genuine warmth and laughter. Alaric buried himself in estate business, though his advisors noticed his distraction, his uncharacteristic irritability, the dark circles forming beneath his eyes from restless nights spent replaying the argument in the garden over and over in his mind. Rosalind, meanwhile, grew increasingly quiet, her earlier joy dimming noticeably in Elena's absence. She continued the remedies as instructed, though without Elena's careful daily oversight, small details began slipping, subtle adjustments that Elena would have caught immediately going unnoticed by those less familiar with the delicate balance required for her continued recovery. It was nearly a week after Elena's departure that Lady Beatrice sought out her nephew in his study, her expression grave with concern. Alaric, she said firmly, I must speak with you regarding your foolishness. He looked up from his papers, clearly startled by his aunt's uncharacteristically direct tone. My foolishness? You allowed the poisonous words of a jealous, spiteful woman to destroy something genuinely precious, Lady Beatrice said, settling into the chair across from his desk with obvious determination. I have watched you these past days, Alaric. You are miserable. Your sister is miserable. And for what? Baseless accusations from a woman who has never once demonstrated genuine care for anyone beyond her own ambitions? I do not know that they were entirely baseless, Alaric said, though his voice lacked real conviction. Do you not? Lady Beatrice pressed. Think carefully, Alaric. Did Elena Whitmore ever once ask you for anything beyond your trust in her remedies? Did she seek gifts, influence, social advancement, or did she simply work tirelessly, night after night, to save a girl she barely knew, expecting nothing whatsoever in return? Alaric remained silent, his aunt's words striking uncomfortably close to truths he had been avoiding since Elena's departure. I raised you better than this, Lady Beatrice continued, her tone softening slightly. Your father, may his memory rest peacefully, always taught you that true character reveals itself through actions, not through the poisoned words of those who wish only to manipulate circumstances for their own benefit. Elena's actions have spoken clearly enough, Alaric. It is only your own fear that refuses to listen. Before Alaric could formulate a response, a sudden commotion sounded from the corridor outside, followed by urgent footsteps and a maid's frightened voice calling for assistance. Both Alaric and Lady Beatrice rose immediately, hurrying toward the source of the disturbance, dread already pooling in their stomachs. They found Rosalind collapsed near her bedroom door, having apparently attempted to walk unassisted to retrieve a book from the adjoining sitting room, her body trembling violently, her breathing labored in a manner disturbingly similar to the crisis weeks earlier. Rosalind, Alaric rushed to his sister's side, gathering her carefully into his arms, as her eyes fluttered weakly, unable to focus properly. Send for the physician immediately, Lady Beatrice commanded the frightened maid, who hurried away at once. Alaric carried his sister back to her bed, his heart pounding with a fear he had not experienced since that terrifying night weeks earlier, before Elena's steady hands and calm expertise had guided them safely through the crisis. The physician arrived within the hour, though his examination revealed little beyond what Alaric already feared. His sister's condition had regressed significantly. The careful balance of remedies Elena had established, disrupted by small inconsistencies that had accumulated gradually over the past week, without proper oversight. I am not certain what has caused this relapse, the physician admitted honestly, his expression troubled. The remedies described to me seem sound in principle, though clearly something within their application has shifted incorrectly. Alaric's blood ran cold with the realization of his own failure. In his stubborn pride, his fear-driven distrust, he had allowed the one person capable of properly guiding his sister's recovery to leave, and now Rosalind was suffering the consequences of his foolishness. I need to send for Elena, he said suddenly, his voice firm with sudden desperate clarity. Alaric, it is nearly evening, Lady Beatrice said carefully. The journey to the Whitmore estate would take considerable time, particularly given the weather. I do not care, Alaric said, already moving toward the door. I will ride through the night if necessary. I cannot lose her, Aunt Beatrice, not through my own foolish pride. He called immediately for his fastest horse, ignoring Lady Beatrice's concerns about the darkening sky and the distant rumble of thunder threatening yet another storm. Within minutes, he was mounted and riding hard through the estate's gates, his heart pounding with fear and desperate hope in equal measure. The ride to the Whitmore estate proved treacherous, rain beginning to fall steadily as he pushed his horse through the darkening countryside, his mind replaying every harsh word he had spoken to Elena in the garden, every moment of doubt he had allowed to poison what should have been unwavering trust and gratitude. He arrived at the Whitmore townhouse well past midnight, soaked through from the storm, his desperate knocking eventually rousing a startled servant who quickly summoned Elena's father. Your Grace, Elena's father said, clearly surprised to find the Duke standing on his doorstep at such an hour, drenched and visibly distressed. What has happened? Please, Alaric said, his voice raw with desperation. He made no attempt to hide. I need to speak with Elena immediately. My sister has taken ill again, and I fear without her help, we may lose her entirely. I know I have no right to ask this, given how I have treated your daughter, but I am begging you. Please allow me to speak with her. Elena's father studied him for a long moment, clearly weighing the sincerity of his desperate plea against whatever Elena had shared regarding their earlier confrontation. Finally he nodded, gesturing Alaric inside. "Wait here," he said, disappearing up the staircase to wake his daughter. Elena descended several minutes later, her expression guarded, uncertain, clearly startled to find Alaric standing in her family's entryway, soaked from the storm, his usual composure entirely abandoned. "Alaric," she said carefully, "what are you doing here?" "Rosalind has relapsed," he said immediately, his voice breaking slightly with barely contained emotion. "I do not fully understand what has gone wrong, but her condition has deteriorated significantly since your departure. Elena, please, I know I have no right to ask anything of you, after how I treated you, but I am begging you to return with me. Not for my sake, but for hers." Elena's expression shifted immediately, from guarded uncertainty to genuine alarm. "How severe is her condition?" "Very similar to before," Alaric said. "The fever, the trembling, the labored breathing. I fear whatever balance you had established has been disrupted." Elena did not hesitate further, despite the lingering hurt from their earlier confrontation. "Give me a moment to gather my supplies." Within 20 minutes, Elena had assembled her remedies and climbed into Alaric's carriage, which had followed behind his horse, both racing back through the storm toward the Vane estate. The journey passed in tense silence, Alaric's earlier desperate words replaced now by anxious worry, as he watched the rain-soaked countryside pass by the carriage window. "Elena," he finally said, breaking the silence as they drew closer to the estate, "I owe you an apology far greater than words can adequately express. I allowed fear and foolish pride to blind me to the truth I had witnessed with my own eyes. You have never once given me reason to doubt your character, and I wounded you deeply through my own weakness." Elena remained quiet for a long moment, her focus divided between her own hurt feelings and her overwhelming concern for Rosalind's condition. "We will discuss this properly once Rosalind is safe," she said finally. "Right now, my only concern is helping her recover." Alaric nodded, understanding the wisdom in her words, despite his desperate need to properly address the wrongs he had committed. They arrived at the estate to find Rosalind's condition much as Alaric had described, her fever dangerously high, her body trembling with the same alarming symptoms from weeks earlier. Elena moved immediately into action, examining Rosalind carefully, questioning Lady Beatrice about the exact remedies administered over the past week, quickly identifying the subtle errors that had accumulated in her absence. "The proportions of the remedy have been slightly off," Elena explained, working quickly to prepare a corrected mixture. "A small enough difference that it might not have mattered under normal circumstances, but combined with her body's continued adjustment to recovery, it created enough imbalance to trigger this relapse." Through the long hours of that stormy night, Elena worked tirelessly once again, correcting the remedies, applying cool compresses, monitoring every subtle change in Rosalind's condition with the same calm, steady expertise she had demonstrated during the first crisis. Alaric remained by her side throughout, no longer questioning her methods, but assisting wherever needed. His earlier doubt replaced entirely by humbled admiration and quiet, desperate hope. As dawn finally broke, the storm clearing to reveal a soft, pale morning light, Rosalind's fever broke as well, her breathing steadying into peaceful, natural sleep. The crisis once again successfully navigated through Elena's tireless dedication and expertise. Exhausted but relieved, Elena finally allowed herself to rest in a chair beside the bed, watching Rosalind's peaceful sleep with quiet satisfaction. Alaric knelt beside her chair, taking her hand gently in his own. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "Not merely for saving my sister's life once again, but for setting aside your own justified hurt to help us, despite everything I said to you." "I did not do this for you," Elena said honestly, though her tone held no bitterness, merely quiet truth. "I did this for Rosalind, because I care for her deeply, regardless of whatever happened between us." "I understand," Alaric said, "but I hope, in time, you might find it within yourself to forgive my foolishness as well. I have learned, through nearly losing you both, through my own doubt, exactly how precious your presence truly is, not merely to my sister's recovery, but to my own heart." Before Elena could respond, a soft knock sounded at the door, and Mr. Ellery entered quietly, holding a folded letter with a troubled expression. "Your Grace," he said carefully, "I believe you should see this immediately. It arrived this morning, and given recent events, I believe it holds considerable importance." Alaric took the letter, his brow furrowing as he read its contents, his expression shifting rapidly from confusion to something far more serious. "What is it?" Elena asked, noticing the sudden tension in his posture. "A confession," Alaric said slowly, "from one of Lady Charlotte's own household servants, detailing exactly how the rumors regarding your character were fabricated and deliberately spread throughout society, specifically to separate us." Elena's breath caught. She admitted to this? It appears her own conscience, or perhaps fear of eventual discovery, convinced her to come forward, Alaric said, his expression hardening with quiet anger. "This letter provides more than enough evidence to clear your name entirely and expose Charlotte's deception for exactly what it was." Relief and vindication flooded through Elena in equal measure, though the exhaustion of the night's crisis tempered any immediate celebration. "What will you do with this information?" "Whatever is necessary," Alaric said firmly, "to ensure your reputation is fully restored, and that Charlotte faces appropriate consequences for the harm her deception nearly caused." As morning light continued spreading gently across the room, illuminating Rosalind's peacefully sleeping form, Elena felt a fragile hope beginning to rebuild within her heart. Hope that whatever damage had been done through doubt and deception might yet be repaired, given time, honesty, and the genuine devotion Alaric had so clearly demonstrated through his desperate ride through the storm to bring her back when it mattered most. Rosalind's recovery from the second crisis proved swifter than the first, her body already familiar with the careful balance of remedies that had guided her through the earlier illness. Within days, color returned fully to her cheeks, her strength rebuilding steadily, until she was once again able to walk unassisted through the estate's corridors, her laughter returning to fill the halls with warmth that had been notably absent during Elena's brief departure. Alaric, true to his word, moved swiftly to address the damage caused by Charlotte's deception. He arranged a private meeting with the heads of several prominent families within society, presenting the servant's signed confession as undeniable evidence of the fabricated rumors, ensuring Elena's reputation was thoroughly and publicly restored. Charlotte herself, faced with irrefutable proof of her scheme, found herself swiftly ostracized from the very social circles she had so carefully cultivated, her family's embarrassment ensuring she would trouble Elena and Alaric no further. With the immediate crisis resolved and Elena's name properly cleared, Alaric requested a private audience with her one evening, nearly 2 weeks after her return to the estate. He found her in the garden, standing near the same fountain where their earlier, painful confrontation had occurred, the memory of that difficult night still lingering faintly between them, despite everything that had transpired since. "Elena," he said softly, approaching carefully, "might I speak with you?" She turned to face him, her expression calm, though carrying a hint of lingering caution. "Of course. I have spent these past weeks reflecting deeply on my own failures," Alaric began, his voice steady, despite the vulnerability evident in his tone. "Not merely the failure of doubting your character, but the deeper failure of allowing fear to govern my life so completely that I nearly destroyed something precious before I had even properly recognized its value." Elena remained quiet, allowing him space to continue, sensing the importance of what he wished to express. "Since my parents passed," he continued, "I built walls around myself, believing that control, distance, and careful management of every variable could protect me from further loss. I see now how foolish that belief truly was. Control cannot protect against loss, Elena. It only ensures a lonely, isolated existence, devoid of genuine connection." "Alaric," Elena began gently, but he raised a hand, requesting permission to finish. "You broke through those walls despite my every effort to maintain them," he continued. "From the very first night at the ball, when you dared to speak truth to power despite the risk to yourself, I sensed something different about you, something that both terrified and fascinated me in equal measure. Your courage, your honesty, your unwavering kindness, even toward someone who treated you initially with such coldness, revealed a character far stronger and more genuine than I had encountered in years of navigating society's careful pretenses." He stepped closer, taking her hands gently in his own, his gray eyes meeting hers with an openness she had never witnessed before. not even during their most tender moments together. "I love you, Elena," he said simply, the words carrying more weight and sincerity than any elaborate declaration could have conveyed. "Not merely for saving my sister's life, though that debt remains immeasurable, but for who you are as a person. Your strength, your compassion, your refusal to compromise your principles despite considerable pressure to do so. I understand if my earlier doubt has damaged your trust beyond repair, but I could not allow another day to pass without expressing the full depth of my feelings toward you." Tears gathered in Elena's eyes, though they carried none of the pain from their earlier confrontation, only overwhelming joy and relief at finally hearing words she had scarcely allowed herself to hope for during the difficult weeks since her departure. "I love you as well, Alaric," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "Despite everything, despite the pain of feeling doubted after everything we shared, I never stopped caring for you. When Rosalind needed me, I did not hesitate to return, not merely for her sake, but because a part of my heart had already recognized that this place, this family, had become somewhere I belonged." Alaric's expression transformed, with genuine, unguarded joy, and he lifted her hands gently to his lips, pressing a tender kiss against her fingers. "Then perhaps we might consider building something lasting together, Elena. Not merely as business associates, nor even as friends, but as partners in every sense of the word." Elena's heart swelled with happiness she had never before experienced so completely. "I would like that very much." Their reconciliation was celebrated properly the following week, during a grand gathering hosted at the Vane estate, ostensibly to celebrate Rosalind's full recovery, though the true purpose became clear when Alaric stood before the assembled guests, Elena's hand held firmly in his own. "I wish to formally acknowledge," he announced to the gathered crowd, which included many of the same society members who had witnessed their initial, hostile confrontation at the ball months earlier, "the debt my family owes to Miss Elena Whitmore. Her courage, compassion, and remarkable skill saved my sister's life, not once, but twice, and in doing so, she has earned not merely my eternal gratitude, but my complete devotion." He turned to face Elena directly, dropping gracefully to one knee before the astonished gathering, producing a small velvet box containing a ring that caught the light with understated elegance. "Elena Whitmore," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent hall, "you entered my life through an act of courage that initially wounded my pride, yet ultimately healed wounds far deeper than I realized I carried. You have shown me that true strength lies not in control or distance, but in vulnerability, honesty, and genuine compassion for others. Would you honor me by becoming my wife, and building a life together grounded in the same trust and devotion you have shown my family since the moment we met?" Elena felt tears spilling freely down her cheeks, though they carried nothing but overwhelming joy as she nodded, unable to speak through the emotion overwhelming her. "Yes," she finally managed, her voice trembling with happiness. "Yes, Alaric, I will marry you." The hall erupted in applause and joyful exclamations, Rosalind's delighted laughter rising clearly above the celebratory noise as she embraced both Elena and her brother with equal enthusiasm, tears of happiness streaming down her own recovered, healthy face. Lady Beatrice, watching the scene with quiet satisfaction, dabbed gently at her own eyes, remembering the difficult years since her nephew had lost his parents, the heavy burden of responsibility he had carried alone for so long, and the genuine joy now radiating from his transformed expression. In the months that followed, Elena and Alaric's wedding became one of the most celebrated events the region had witnessed in years, uniting not merely two individuals, but two families, two worlds previously divided by rigid expectations of class and status, that their genuine love had ultimately transcended entirely. Rosalind, fully recovered and thriving, stood proudly beside Elena as her closest companion during the ceremony, her health a constant, joyful reminder of the courage and compassion that had first brought Elena into their lives. As Elena and Alaric exchanged their vows beneath a sky painted with the soft golden light of a perfect afternoon, surrounded by family, friends, and the quiet, contented presence of a household finally healed from years of isolation and grief, neither could help but reflect on the unlikely journey that had brought them to this moment. What began as bitter rivalry, born from a single act of courageous honesty at a crowded ball, had transformed gradually into something far deeper and more meaningful than either had initially believed possible. Through crisis, doubt, and eventual reconciliation, they had built a love grounded not in convenience or circumstance, but in genuine respect, unwavering trust, and the shared understanding that true strength lies in the courage to be vulnerable, honest, and compassionate, even when the world around them suggested otherwise. As they turned to face their gathered loved ones, hands clasped together in quiet, joyful promise, Elena and Alaric stepped forward into their future together, a future built not upon the fragile foundations of pride or status, but upon the enduring, unshakable strength of a love that had been earned through trial, and ultimately, triumphantly won.